Thank you for joining us for this episode of Career Conversations. We're excited to be joined by one of our former Beckman Young Investigator awardees, Dr. Shiv Halasyamani. And Shiv, it's great to see you today, and we're very interested to hear about your career journey. So could you start us off with sort of what interests you about science? When did you start to get that bug?
I would say it was in college. First, thank you very much for having me. It was in college, and I was always just interested in doing experiments and just sort of tinkering around in the lab. And I really got into inorganic chemistry and materials in graduate school. And there, I was very lucky to join Professor Kenneth Poppelmeyer's group. And I'll say this from an outset for younger people, it's really important to pick good mentors who are going to support your career throughout. I graduated in 96, so that's almost 30 years ago now. I'm doing the math right. And Ken still writes me letters, and we still talk a couple times a month. It's not as if I graduated and he abandoned me. So that's really, really important. So talk to students in the lab, talk to, postdocs. What do they do when they finish? Um, Sorry to get back to your question. So from there, it was just, enjoying being in the lab and discovering new materials. And so that really is where the bug started. And whenever I make anything new, just the excitement of making a new compound was something that I was always interested in.
So let's go back then, since it's important to find a good mentor. Can
Mhm.
you talk about like the nuts and bolts of that process? Like, how did you come up with a short list of potential mentors that you then investigated? How were you approaching that, making that jump from college to grad school?
So when I went to grad school, like people do, you shop around for a PhD advisor. It's a mutual decision. I talked to the members of the group who are currently in the group, and ask them, okay, you finished your PhD. Does your advisor write you letters? Does he help you try to find a postdoc or a job, or what happens when you finish? And so I asked that with every group I was interested in joining, and some of the answers were, well, you finish and then you're kind of on your own. And with Ken, it was very clear that they said, oh no, he'll help you. If you want to do X, he will help you do X. Now he's not going to tell you, you should do X and Y, but if you say, I want to go into industry, he'll say, okay, then let's work on you going into industry. What skills do you need to have so you interview well at I was going to say Dow or DuPont, but those are changed. That at any company, what are they looking for when you interview? And so he would guide students in all areas, and he has students in academics, in industry, at PUIs. I believe one of his former students is a patent lawyer. It was, that's what he wanted to do when he finished. And he said, okay, that's what you want to do, then let's work towards you getting to do that.
Yeah.
So I would say, most importantly, when you're in grad school and you're choosing your advisor, talk to the students in the group.
Mhm.
They're the ones who will tell you, what it's like to work for that person. They will be brutally honest and, make the decision with as much information as possible.
So that sounds pretty unique 30 years ago. Do you
Mhm.
think things have changed? You think if people now currently looking for mentors, would they find a lot of people who are willing to kind of help with any direction you want to go?
I would think so. I mean, that's what I do, but again, I guess an older generation. I mean, to be honest, if the person says I will only take you if you plan to become a professor like me, then if that's what you want to do, okay. But you may change your mind in grad school, which is very common. And then if you realize 3 years in you don't want to be a professor and you're working for somebody who's only going to support you, who is going to be professor, then you are kind of stuck. So um, I think that the younger faculty are even more so into traditional and non-traditional careers. I think they're very open about that. But I think the younger students and postdocs need to have that conversation. Need to say, this is what I'm interested in. How can you help me get there? Be very honest.
Cool. So grad school, did you go right into a postdoc?
I did. So so at the 1996 Solid State Gordon Conference, is where I'm my postdoctor advisor. Um, and this is before posters were actually printed on those big sheets of paper. So you had little,
Eight by-
thumbtack. Right, exactly. So right. So it tells you that. So he was giving a poster and he had posted on his poster, postdoc wanted. And, he's about 10 years older than I am, senior guy at the time. And so, very nervous. I said, okay, took a deep breath and just introduced myself.
Mhm.
And very nice guy. He just said, I know your boss. He said, yeah, send me your stuff, which meant in those days putting it in the mail and sending the stuff. There was no, so I tell younger people, talk to senior faculty. 9 times out of 10, they're more than happy to talk to you. Honestly, we'd rather talk to younger people than our colleagues. Let's be honest. Okay. I mean, I'd much rather talk to grad students and postdocs and hear about what they're interested in doing than talking to the same colleagues I've talked to for the past 20 years, consistently. So yeah, talk to them, ask them questions. They'd be thrilled. So really it was just that conversation that started everything. And I mailed him everything in August. He made me an offer in I think it was September, October. And then I went to England in January. It was, in those days relatively quick. And yeah, if it wouldn't have been for that initial conversation, none of this would have happened. And
Where
so
were you in your grad school progression when you had that conversation?
So I finished in September of 96. So this was the summer just before, so a few months before. So I was pretty much writing my thesis and sort of looking what's the next step going to be. And I had applied for a few things here and there, hadn't heard anything back. And so I was just kind of looking. I wasn't quite sure what I was going to do. I knew I wanted to do a postdoc. I was quite sure about that. But in terms of who I was going to work for, um, what the next step would be, I was still sort of weighing all of my options. But when Dermot O'Hare, Professor O'Hare at Oxford, um, was looking and he said, I'm looking for somebody with your skills, I thought, well, why not? I was 26, why not live in another country for a couple of years? And
Was that fun?
that was
Transfer.
great. That was fantastic. It was absolutely fantastic. You're at that age, you really have no other responsibilities. I mean, I didn't have a family, so I could just go there, pick up everything, and just go. So I recommend to people, if you have that chance for a year or two, why not? Because you may not get it later, and it's pretty rare when it turns out to be a bad move. You generally you meet some incredible people and you have some great experiences.
Yeah. So what was the next step then? Did you do multiple postdocs? Just one?
Just one. So again, this is gonna date how old I am. So in 98
We've
is
already established how old you are. It's okay.
okay. Well, I was gonna say in 1998 is when CNE News went online for the first time. So before, if you did a postdoc in Europe, it was assumed you'd have to come back and do a postdoc in the US because you wouldn't know about the US jobs until it was too late. You wouldn't get the ads until, 6 weeks after.
Did they arrive by ship?
Yes, exactly. They would arrive by boat. So if you would see any news, in October, be published in October, they wouldn't get it until the end of November. So you'd miss all the ads. So this was the first year at the fall in 98 where CNE News actually had a website. And I use website loosely. You could go online and see the ads.
Mhm.
So I started looking and I spoke with Dermot and he said, yeah, I think you should start applying. I think, you should throw your hat in the ring and see what happens.
Mhm.
Um, and so I really wasn't expecting to get interviews or even an offer in the first year. It was just sort of, I started my postdoc in January. Um, it hadn't been that long. And I thought, well, if you don't apply, you don't get. So let's just sort of see. And so I applied to a few places. A couple of schools actually interviewed me in London because the faculty member happened to be in England at the time. So I just, took the train to England and went from there. Um, Other schools were like, fine, because flying from London to Houston or London to New York isn't that much more expensive than flying cross country in the US. So they're saying, yeah, we'll fly you over. So from a cost perspective, didn't cost them any more. It was just really the timing. And
Mhm.
so the fact that I could hear about the job openings in real time was different than, even 3 or 4 years previous. So that was a big deal.
Interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And you ended up at Houston right away?
Yeah. So they interviewed me, and then they made me an offer, and then um at the same time I got a fellowship to stay at Oxford for another year. So I asked if I could defer the offer for 1 year, and they said fine. They said, but then you need to come after 1 year, and that was okay. And then so that sort of gave me a year to think about what I was going to do here exactly, where I was going to buy things, where I was going to live, all these sort of things. And so yeah, so I came here in the fall of 99. So I'm sorry. So I think CNU started in 97. Sorry. So I applied in the fall of 97. So, right. And then so I came into Houston in July of 99 and started my position, and um, yeah, and just started to get going. As I said, the the internet was just getting going. So in terms of finding equipment and all these things, it was still looking through catalogs, um, calling companies to sending you, hard copy catalogs to go through. So that was looking back, a little tedious, but everyone had to do that.
Mhm. So kind of looking back and maybe you incorporate some of these mentoring tips and stuff
Mhm.
in your with your current students. Like what are the skills that you relied on most making that transition to running your own lab?
That's a great question. So I think in Dermot's lab, um, he gave his postdocs a lot of independence. He basically just said, you run the group, or you run this area of the group, come to me if there's any problems. And excuse me, they had this system at Oxford where in your final year as an undergrad, you were required to do 1 year of research. So they call them part two students. So these students, every year we would have 2 or 3 of these just in the lab. And so one of them was assigned to me and another graduate student. So I had some, I guess, early mentoring experience or supervisory experience there.
Mhm.
Uh, and then I also talked to some other faculty there and at Houston who said, look, try to hire a postdoc right away, because they can help you set up the lab while you're teaching and doing all your administrative stuff and everything. So I was able to hire a postdoc immediately. My first 2 graduate students were fantastic. Um, so initially it was, very hands-on. What are you guys doing this week? Let's get this data, let's get this paper out, because the clock was ticking. But even with the postdoc and the 2 students, I would talk to them and, what do you want to do when you finish? you know,
Mhm.
what's the next step? Tell me what you want to do, because it's your career. If you want to do X, Y, and Z, let me know, and then I'll help you get to that next step. I'm not going to push you into an area that you don't want to go into, but you have to educate me on what you want to do. And
Mhm.
that's the most important, because um, if you want to, I don't want to make the decision for you. You have, this model works great for me. Maybe it's not for you. Just fine. And so my first grad student's actually a professor in Korea. Um, and the other woman that joined with him, she's actually a patent lawyer in Texas. And so they're both doing great. And uh, for me, that's fantastic. When I see my people in my group doing great out there, I couldn't be happier.
Yeah. What made you apply for the Beckman Young Investigator Program?
Okay, so I didn't actually hear about it until the second year I was eligible, because I think also I wasn't that web savvy in those days, so I didn't actually search, and then I realized, oh, I'm eligible.
Yeah.
And I started looking through, and it said, okay, in those days you had to write a 3-page proposal. That was it. And you sent it in, no interview, nothing. I thought, okay, I can write a 3-page proposal. And you know, the money at the time was pretty extraordinary. And so the first year I applied, I didn't get it. And it was just, a letter saying, thank you for applying. We've received a lot of. I said, okay. So I applied again the next year, and the Beckman Foundation said, congratulations, and you guys sent me a check for $275,000. Made payable to me. Yeah, made payable to me. Okay, I'd never seen a check.
Not anymore, just for the
No.
record.
I just thought, I've never seen a check this large in my life made payable to me. I thought I couldn't cash this. No, no. So I went to the Department of Business Administrator. I said, "What do I do with this?" She goes, "Okay, we need to put this in an account." So, right. So, but that was basically it. It was just, you send something in, you got a yes or no, and if you got a yes, you got the big check.
Mhm.
And if you did, you didn't. It wasn't as it is today. And so, um, and the foundation was very clear that, hey, you can do whatever you want. This is for you to really get your thing, to get your research going. Equipment, personnel, chemicals, you do what you think you need to do to take it to the next step. And that was great. That flexibility was fantastic. Was able to hire another postdoc. I was able to buy some equipment that we still use to this day. Even, it's still working, it's still fine. We still use that to collaborate with a lot of people. And so it really helped getting a certain area of research in the group going. If it wasn't for that, I don't think we'd be able to do it. Because
Mhm.
that was at that stage, uh, I'm pretty sure most of my grants were getting rejected. So I think that sort of helped you get over the hump a little bit. Yeah.
Mhm. So we're running up on our allotted time here today. So just want to wrap up with, is there anything else that you would like to share that we haven't covered yet, especially, thinking about starting this whole process and making that decision to go to grad school and shop for a mentor.
Right. So I actually give a graduate school a little spiel to my general chemistry audience. And I tell them, look, only go to grad school if you really want to. You know, don't do it because you don't want to get a job or because you're bored or, for whatever reason. You should do, yeah, I know. Only do it.
Boring, yeah.
Oh, exactly. I said, but I have people say, oh, I want to go to grad school, I don't want to get a job. I said, no, no, no. Do it because it's what you're really passionate about. You really are interested in learning in depth about a certain topic. And if that's not you, that's fine. I'm not making a moral judgment. Then most people don't go to grad school and they live perfectly happy lives. So, you know, it's a really important decision. It's 4, 5, 6 years out of your life, when you're very young. So really think about it. And if you do make that decision, then do your homework. Where do you want to live? Who do you want to work for? What do you want to do after that next step? Because graduate school is not meant to be a way of life. It's just a few years, you finish your degree, then you move on. What is that next step? So I would say always be thinking sort of what is the next step in your career? And
Mhm.
how can the person I work for help me get to that next step? And they're most of the professors I've met are very helpful in doing that.
Mhm.
So I think if you have that conversation, they will help.
Great. Thank you so much. Appreciate
Yep.
your time and your insights. Thank
Okay.
you.